Hello everyone. In our last session we talked about 3 approaches to string teaching, and we discovered that a Kodaly approach will produce oral literacy. And so today we are going to talk about some of the important principles and tools that we use in a Kodaly approach. And so the first one, which we already talked about last time, is the educated ear. So an educated ear is one that has inner hearing. And so in order to develop that, the singing has to come before the playing. That's just one of the big approaches, is that we sing first and then we do the playing. We transfer the knowledge from singing to the instrument. Number 2, the best materials to use for instruction are songs from childhood native to one's culture. This was a big thing in Kodaly's own philosophy, and he said this. He said, quote, "Each nation has a rich variety of folk songs well suited to teaching purposes. If selected and graded carefully, they furnish the best material through which to introduce musical elements and make the children conscious of them." So that is why he and Bartok scoured the countryside and collected thousands of their native folk songs in their area and cataloged them and categorized them so they could use that for teaching. But, he said, however, no nation can be limited to its own songs because every nation has only a certain group of formulas, that's both rhythmic and melodic formulas, which cannot contain all the possibilities in music. Close quote. For instance, in Hungarian music, they don't have 6/8. So, guess where we have to go for that? We need to go to Ireland, right? They've got plenty of 6/8. That's just one little tiny example of what we're talking about as far as national cultures containing various melodic formulas. And so our first choice is when we're looking for materials to use, our first go-to is our native folk songs. And the thing about America is that we've got such a multiplicity of ethnic groups that depending on where you are, you could select something from England or some Hispanic ones. But what we have selected are those that are from English-speaking cultures. Largely Britain and American. We've got quite a few from African American. We've got, anyway, those songs that are native to our country or English-speaking cultures. But you could certainly substitute Spanish-speaking ones if you have that demographic in your school or in your culture. The next thing we go to is the folk songs of other lands. Like, say, when the best example of an element is not native to your country, then you go to someone else, to another country. And then, after that, the transition to really fine art music is very smooth because some of the best composers used folk elements in their music, such as Haydn, Beethoven, Mozart. They all used those elements in their music. So high quality art music. And Kodaly said only the best is good enough for the children. So we want to choose those things which are of great quality for teaching the children. Okay, so now number 3 principle is the learning sequence. It has to be carefully crafted in a logical way. So we introduce one element at a time, and we help them to understand that element before we move on to the next. We don't want to have too many new things all at once. Okay? So, in fact, that's one of the hallmarks of a Kodaly program is the learning sequence. It's just so beautifully crafted that there are no gaps. Number 4, technique and literacy. So we talked about this a little bit last time, but they grow together. So technique we can get very quickly when we are having the children transfer a song that they know in their head from singing to the violin or the cello, the viola. but we're also teaching them the elements of music, and so they are, the two learning tracks speak to each other, but they are independent of each other. But as the children get better and better at both, then they merge, so that their ability to play is as good as their ability to read. Okay. Number 5, the group class is really an important part of the children's learning because it helps them to learn from each other as well as from the teacher. And so, and this is where we play our singing games and we have various activities, but it is pretty amazing how they do learn from each other. So I have decided, and as through my experience, that there are 3 main functions of the group class. First of all is to be teaching them the elements of music through their singing and singing games. That's where we start with that. And the second function of the group class is when they're playing together, they are learning ensemble skills. So it's kind of like an orchestra prep. The third function of it is that they're playing for each other. So it's kind of like a little mini performance class. So those 3 aspects of the group class for me are very, very important. And you know, I've taught this curriculum to students without the group class, and it works and it can work, but it's just never as good. It's never as thorough. It's never as fun, as motivational. And so I strongly encourage you to put together a group class for your students. And then, of course, the last is a private lesson. So the private lesson addresses the technical development of each student. And that is very important too. And the beautiful thing about having both in your program is that if ever you don't cover something in the group class, you usually can just make it up in the private lesson, or they kind of cover for each other. Since the children are getting 2 lessons a week, you can pretty much cover everything in between the 2. So those are some of the main principles of a Kodaly approach, and actually some of the ways that I have implemented it in my own teaching. But I just wanted to tell you now that I am not going to give you a lot of guidance in string technique or violin technique, because I'm a violinist, but it also applies to the violists and the cellos, because we've got materials for all 3 instruments. Because there are a lot of fine approaches that yield some really fine results. So what I'm going to recommend to you is that you use the technique that works for you, the one that you have studied, that you are an expert at. And I will, however, give you some of the methods that I do use, because that will be part of it. You want to make sure that you teach technique along the way, of course. That's very important. So if there's something that I am teaching that you have a little different slant on, feel free to just do it your way. That would be fine. But I just want you to think ahead. So how are you going to teach technique like positions and intonation and sound production and bow use? All that stuff you want to have clear in your head from what your own learning has given you or what you studied from other people. So that being said, your students are going to need to have a book 1. So here is for their instrument. So here's a violin book 1. It looks like it's purple. Here is a cello book 1. It's a yellow cello. And here is the viola. This is the viola book 1. Okay. And it's designed to be visually uncomplicated to the children, so it might not be, well, what do I do with this page? You know, like here's the first page. It has the 4 strings and their names. So you might wonder what to do with that. But the good news is for you, there's going to be an explanation in the instructions in your teacher's manual. So you'll have, there's a comprehensive teacher's manual that goes with this course. So in that manual, you're going to be able to find under the pages or the topics of private lesson. Each lesson plan has a private lesson section, and that's where you're going to find the instructions of how to use the pages. All right, so you don't need to worry about that. Songs that are written, let's see, you're going to notice that there are songs that are written in solfa notation. So solfa notation means that you've got the rhythm here, and then you've got the solfa underneath, and then usually there are words. But they're really only in the book for reference, because they don't learn these songs from reading the book, right? We just talked about that. They're going to be learning them by rote in the group class, but they are here for reference, and you can talk about them, and then they're going to see what they look like. So the whole point, the purpose of those that are in solfa notation is to build technique, right? And now, so that's the apple tree song. Here's the apple tree song on the staff. So here it is, apple tree on the staff, and the purpose of the staff songs is to teach literacy, right? So we talked about those true learning tracks, but that's how they're identified in the book. In the teacher's manual now, there are 33 group lesson plans, and that is where you're going to find the songs and the singing games and the instructions for teaching the musical concepts. So the pedagogical process used by Kodaly and his associates comes in 3 steps. The first is to prepare the element, the next one is to present the element, and the third one is to practice the element. So what it means to prepare the element is just simply to learn it through singing. Usually this is done in our class through singing games, so the children really know the song well before we start talking about the elements inside of the song. And sometimes we also visually prepare the element by using some visual manipulatives, like moving some objects around to indicate highness and lowness, and certain things like that. And occasionally there's a kinesthetic preparation where those, especially who are good learners with kinesthetic help, we will show the element on the body and to determine its highness and lowness. That is more rare. Most of the time we are going to be preparing it with singing. The next one is presenting. So that new musical element is derived from the song, kind of tease it out of the song, and it's given a label, a name and a symbol. So the label, of course, is the name of the element, and it's given a sign or a symbol. So another term for presenting this element is to make it conscious. And you're going to see in the lesson plans a bold MC. Whenever you see MC in the lesson plan, that means that right now we are making this new element conscious. Stands for make conscious. Just so you'll know what that is all about when you see that in the manual. Okay, so the next thing is to practice. The element is reinforced by reading new material, by writing, by improvising, by composing, by listening to new material, or just listening and identifying what the element is, and part work. So all of those activities are used to reinforce that one element till we move on to the next. But most of the practice also for this instrumental learning is going to be on the instrument. If you were in a Kodaly classroom singing, they would be doing it with their singing, but since we've got to practice our instrument, most of the reinforcement of the element is also going to be on the instrument itself. So those are some of the tools, some of the principles. Now we're going to move on to some of the tools that are used. And of course, the first one is the tonic solfa, or movable do. This system of solmization originated with Guido of Arezzo in the 11th century. So this is a very old system of understanding sounds, of how sounds relate to each other. In it, the home tone or the tonal center of the song is do for major keys and la for minor keys. It focuses the ear on pitch relationships and functions within a tonal system. This is learning the relative system of notes. And I assure you that I had no concept of that when I was growing up and learning, but I've found that its value since then is certainly important to me now in my teaching. Okay, the next tool to help out to learning these the solfa are the hand signs. The hand signs are usually credited to John Kerwin, who is an English music educator in the 19th century. This is where Kodaly went to England to study the excellent music education systems there when he was coming up with his own plan. And so that's where he learned the hand signs. So they are kinesthetic visualization in space of a high-low relationship among the notes, reinforcing their intervallic feeling. And in your teacher's manual, there's a chart. I'm going to show you a few of these. Not all of them, but just some of them. The learning sequence for singing begins with the two notes. So we don't start out with do. We're going to start out with so mi. So mi, so mi. Because just about all cultures have children's songs that use those two notes. So it's almost kind of a universal tone set for children's nursery songs. So that's where we start. And next we add do. So it's in so mi do. So mi do. We talk about that. This is all going to be explained. You're going to be able to see how it all fits together as we go along. After do, then comes re. So mi re do. Okay. And then fa is added to form the pentachord. So a pentachord is a 5-note scale. They're all steps. So fa mi re do. And so, and this is where we introduce the concept of half steps and whole steps, because half steps and whole steps are very important on the violin, right? So we talk about that, especially when fa is added. Now, fa is usually taught later in a Kodaly classroom because of those half steps, but we really need it on the violin. So this is a little bit of a change or a little difference between string teaching and just teaching in a Kodaly classroom, which was just for singing. La is learned. We teach la is learned as a note that is higher than so, but this is for singing only. We're not going to really reinforce it because playing it involves a string crossing, and that's going to come up right away in book 2. So what we want to do especially is to stick with the pentachord, especially for the violins and the violas, so that they can give that fourth finger a lot of great practice and not be able to succumb to fourth finger phobia. I'm sure you all know about that. So you're going to see how this fits together, but those are the tones that we're going to be using primarily in book 1. All right, so the next tool, of course, is the absolute letter names, which the children learn, which is the absolute system of notes, which is what I learned. But the way we speak about that is that they are the addresses where the solfa notes live. In other words, they don't move around. They stay put. It's like if you're living in a house, you might move, but the house does not move. And so in that regard, the children learn that concept. But I'm just going to throw out the idea that it is very important for instrumentalists to learn both systems. They need to learn the relative system and the absolute system. You don't want to neglect the absolutes in favor of the solfa, because then they are really going to be handicapped when it comes to fingerings. And what happens when we get to the atonal music, which is of course down the road a ways. But so in my second year, I really emphasize the learning of that, so that they are able to know those note names just as well as they know the solfa and know the purposes of both the relative and the absolute systems. Another tool we have are the rhythm syllables. So we used French syllables, and there are various iterations of that around the country and in Europe. What we use here are for a quarter note is ta, for eighth notes is ti-ti, for 16th notes tiki-tiki. But what the beautiful part about these is that they indicate duration. And so they are voiced, but they're never written as words. Their written representation is stem notation. So when we write a rhythm, we just use the stems. It's very quick. You don't have to write the note heads. And with duration syllables like this, it's possible for the children to chant a pattern correctly in rhythm, which would be impossible if they used note value names. Like, for instance, ta, ti, ti, ta, ta, quarter note, eighth note, quarter note, quarter note. You can see the disadvantage of using the note value names. So this is why we use tas, titis. Once students understand the rhythmic note duration, they should also learn the correct terms for the notes, like quarter note, half note. So they need to know, what I usually say is musicians call this quarter note. But when we say the rhythm, we are going to say ta. Okay? In time, of course, the students can learn other systems of counting, which I do after they're pretty well skilled in the French syllables. So those are some of the tools that we use, and I just wanted to mention just a few things about how I organize the class in my group lessons, because my space is limited. So what I do is we play violins first. So all the stands and the music is set up for them when they come in. So, but when we finish with the violin part, or whatever string instrument you're teaching, then they put their instruments away very quickly in order to resume the class with their singing activities. So the nice thing about this is that in the sequence it puts the heavier concentration at the beginning of class when they're fresh. But you know what, if you are teaching in a school or otherwise have a lot of space available, you could use two spaces, one for playing the instruments and then one for singing games and activities. That would be wonderful. If you have access to that kind of space, I would certainly do that. You will need a whiteboard with markers, and it's nice to have a musical staff whiteboard as well. So you can see behind me I've got one of those. Some classrooms have like when we were looking in some of the schools in Hungary, they have a sliding chalkboard or whiteboard, so you can have something written on the staff and then have a blank board that you can do other stuff onto. That would be awesome. I happen to have this whiteboard with a staff on it, and I use magnetic notes. If you choose to do that, then make sure that you have a magnetic whiteboard so that they will stick there. You will also need a keyboard, whether it's electronic or a regular piano. It doesn't really matter. Although I must say that the electronic keyboards have sounds available that are really nifty to use. Different stops and different sounds. I think that the children really enjoy it when I change that up a little bit. But you know what? If you feel like your keyboard skills are very limited, let me assure you that really the only skills that you need for this are no more than what you learned in college in your first semester theory class. You know, 1, 4, 5, you can do it. All right, so don't worry about it. And then you can use the keyboard skills that you have however you would like. The group class lesson plans are designed for a 1-hour class. Some of them are quite full of material, especially that first one. If you're not able to complete everything in the time you have, just adapt it to your own circumstances. Be sure you maintain a sequence of learning, though, so that the children understand each musical element before you go on to the next. If you want to add material to reinforce an element, you certainly may do that, but I wouldn't skip concepts because you don't want to give them too many new things all at once. It just tends to lead to confusion and overwhelm. And I must say that the pace of this curriculum is very fast. It's fast enough to keep the children engaged and learning and enjoying their music. And because it is pretty fast, I recommend it for children who are about age 7. I have found that it doesn't really work for 5-year-olds just because they don't have the cognitive skills yet to keep the pace the pace going, it would be better for them to be involved in a preparatory singing class where their ears are really being developed, and there are lots of games, which is what they mostly are interested in doing. Anyway, and I have given you some tips for a successful group class, which are listed in your teacher's manual, so I recommend that you read that. They're on page Roman numeral 5. It's just at the end of the preface part of your teacher's manual. I think that you'll enjoy reading over those. And also enjoy this new adventure as you teach your students to be complete musicians.